the woman in the back row. The church bells rang out across the small town of Glenfield like soft echoes of hope. Inside the old stone chapel, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting vibrant colors over the rows of well-dressed guests seated in quiet anticipation. The air was filled with the scent of roses and sandalwood, and the soft hum of the organ marked the beginning of a day meant to be remembered. It was a wedding, one that would be talked about for months, but not for the reasons anyone expected. The very last row of the church, far away from the marble altar and the elegant decorations, sat a woman with tired eyes and a quiet spirit. She wore a modest blue dress, slightly faded but clean, and clutched a small handbag in her lap with both hands. Beside her sat a little boy, no more than 5 years old, his brown curls neatly combed, his small suit slightly too big for his thin frame. They were not part of the official guest list. No one had invited them. No one even noticed they were there, at least not yet. Her name was Evelyn. She was a single mother, barely scraping by with 2 part-time jobs and a heart that had learned how to keep breaking and still beat. The bride was her younger cousin. They had grown up together like sisters, once inseparable, sharing dreams beneath the stars as children. But when Evelyn got pregnant at 19, everything changed. Her family, devout and proud, turned cold. Her cousin distanced herself. The church whispered. She was no longer the shining girl with a future. She became a story mothers warned their daughters about. Still, she came. She wanted to be there, even if only in the shadows. Not for attention, not for forgiveness, but because love, real love, doesn't go away, even when it's not returned. She sat silently, watching the ceremony begin, her heart full of memory and quiet pain. Then, just as the bride began to walk down the aisle, someone noticed her. It was the bride's aunt, a stern woman named Margaret, who had always spoken the loudest in family matters. She turned and whispered to the usher beside her, her eyes narrowing as she pointed discreetly toward the back. Within seconds, a man in a black vest approached Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, but this section is reserved." Evelyn nodded politely. "I understand. We'll stay quietly. We're not in anyone's way." He hesitated, then stepped back. But Margaret had seen the exchange, and Margaret didn't hesitate. She stood up, interrupting the sacred moment, and turned to face the back. "You shouldn't be here," she said coldly, her voice louder than the organ. "You weren't invited. This is a holy ceremony." All eyes turned, gasps, murmurs. The bride paused mid-step, confused. The groom looked toward the back, uncertain. Evelyn stood slowly, her face flushed with shame. She bent down to pick up her son, who clutched her sleeve tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We'll go." But before she could take a step, a new voice cut through the tension. No, it was deep, calm, unmistakable. Keanu Reeves stood from the front pew. No one had expected him to be there. He had arrived quietly without announcement, at the personal request of the groom, an old friend he had once helped during a difficult time. He didn't seek the spotlight. He never did. He came as a guest, not a celebrity. But in that moment, he became something else entirely. He walked slowly down the aisle, the entire church watching in stunned silence. He stopped beside Evelyn and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "She has every right to be here," he said. "This is a place of love, not judgment." Margaret's face twisted. "You don't understand, Mr. Reeves. I understand enough," he interrupted, his voice still soft but resolute. "You don't get to throw someone out of God's house because of your opinion. Faith isn't fashion. It doesn't follow your seating chart." He turned to Evelyn and smiled. "Please, stay." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She looked around, unsure. The church was frozen in a strange silence, caught between shame and awe. Her son looked up at Keanu with wide eyes, unsure whether to be afraid or amazed. Keanu knelt slightly so he was eye level with the boy. "You like weddings?" he asked gently. The boy nodded slowly. "Me too," Keanu said. "Let's sit together." He walked them back to the front pew, past stunned guests and shifting glances, and made space for them beside him. The ceremony resumed, but something had changed. It was quieter now, deeper. The bride's steps were slower, her smile more uncertain. After the vows, when the couple kissed and the crowd stood in applause, Keanu leaned over to Evelyn. "I'm sorry that happened," he said, "but I'm glad you stayed." Evelyn wiped her eyes. "Thank you. I didn't want to cause trouble." "You didn't," Keanu said. They did. Outside, while guests gathered for photos, Margaret pulled the groom aside, furious. "He humiliated us," she hissed. "Why did you invite someone like him?" The groom looked at her with something between sadness and fatigue. "Because he understands what grace really means." The reception hall was lavish. Golden lights, white roses, champagne fountains. But in a quiet corner near the dessert table, Keanu and Evelyn sat with her son, sharing a plate of cake. They laughed softly, not to make a scene, but because kindness creates space where joy can bloom again. Just then, a photographer passed by. He snapped a quick photo without asking. Keanu smiling beside a woman with kind eyes and a boy holding a cupcake with both hands. The flash went unnoticed. By the next morning, that photo would be everywhere, and the story would begin to spread. But so would something else. A secret. Because what Evelyn didn't know, what no one knew, was that this moment, this act of quiet defiance, would soon pull Keanu into something much deeper, something that would challenge everything he believed about forgiveness, faith, and what it truly means to stand up for someone with nothing to offer but truth. A letter was already waiting for him in his hotel room, from someone who saw what happened, and it would change everything. The letter in room 402, the sun crept through the edges of the blackout curtains, casting long, golden lines across the carpeted floor of room 402 at the Hillcrest Inn. Keanu Reeves sat at the small table near the window, quietly stirring his coffee without drinking it. The events of the previous day, the wedding, the church, the confrontation, replayed in his mind, not as memories, but as questions. He wasn't used to stepping into the spotlight uninvited. He had spent much of his life avoiding it, letting his actions speak instead of his voice. But yesterday had been different. Something in Evelyn's eyes, in the way she stood holding her son's hand with quiet dignity, had stirred something deep inside him, something unresolved, something painfully familiar. As he reached for the remote to drown the silence with the morning news, his eyes landed on a thin white envelope resting on the carpet just beneath the door. It hadn't been there the night before. Someone had slid it under while he slept. There was no name on the front, no handwriting, no seal, just the weight of something that didn't belong. He picked it up slowly, turning it over once before opening it. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. No signature. Just a message written in clean block letters. "You think you helped her yesterday. You don't know what she's hiding. Ask her about St. Francis. Ask her what really happened." He read it again. And again. The words were simple, but they carried weight. An edge that suggested more than just gossip. They felt like a warning. Or a challenge. He placed the note on the table and stared out the window. St. Francis. He had heard that name before. Years ago, during a fundraiser for struggling single mothers, one of the speakers had mentioned a home for women in crisis located just outside the city limits. He remembered because the story had moved him. A story of a girl who had run away from abuse, who gave birth alone, and who had almost lost her child because no one believed she deserved help. Was it the same place, later that morning? Keanu walked the quiet streets of Glenfield, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, sunglasses on, head low. He didn't want attention. He just needed clarity. He found Evelyn sitting on a park bench not far from the church. Her son played nearby, chasing pigeons with the innocent joy only children understood. She looked up and smiled softly as he approached, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "You again?" she said gently. "I thought maybe you'd disappeared like everyone else does." Keanu sat beside her. "Someone left a note under my door. Evelyn's smile faded. A note? He nodded. Said to ask you about St. Francis. For a long moment she didn't speak. The air between them thickened. Not with anger, but with memory. Finally she whispered, I wondered how long it would take. Keanu waited. She exhaled, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. I haven't told anyone the full truth, not even my son. Not because I'm ashamed, but because some truths make people run, and I've had enough people run from me to last a lifetime. He didn't push. He just waited. Evelyn stared ahead, watching her son. When I found out I was pregnant, I was 19. The father, he wasn't a good man. Not at all. I didn't want him near my baby. But when I told my family, they didn't believe me. They thought I was lying to cover up my mistake. They called it rebellion. Said I was trying to shame the family. My uncle, he was a deacon at St. Francis. He told them I couldn't stay under their roof unless I agreed to give the baby up and confess my sins. I refused. So they sent me away. Keanu's jaw tensed. I stayed at the St. Francis shelter, she continued. I gave birth there, alone. And then, the worst part came. A few weeks later, a man from the church came to the shelter saying he was there on behalf of the diocese. He told me that custody had been transferred, that I had no legal right to keep my baby. They had forged my signature, filed false papers. I was just a scared kid. No money, no lawyer. They tried to take him from me. Keanu clenched his hands. But you didn't let them. No, she said, tears brimming. I ran. I hid for months. Eventually, a retired social worker helped me fight the paperwork. She saved us. But I never went back. I never told anyone. I've just been surviving. The silence returned, heavier now. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out the note again, handing it to her. She read it once, her face unreadable. Margaret, she whispered. She always said I was a stain on the family. She tried to bury what happened. Looks like she still wants to. Keanu leaned back, eyes closed briefly. This isn't about shame anymore. It's about power. And they don't want people like you showing strength. Evelyn nodded. So what now? He looked at her, quiet but steady. We tell the story. Evelyn laughed softly, bitterly. No one's going to listen to someone like me. They will, Keanu said, if we make them. Later that afternoon, they met with Jonathan, a local journalist and old friend of Keanu's, who had recently launched an independent online series focusing on unheard voices in small communities. When Keanu introduced him to Evelyn, Jonathan didn't ask her to perform pain or cry on cue. He simply listened, recorded, and asked questions that made her feel like a human, not a headline. As the interview ended, Jonathan leaned forward. This isn't just a story, it's a mirror, and the people who turned away from it will see themselves in it whether they like it or not. Keanu helped Evelyn and her son return home that evening. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom apartment, above a bookstore, but it was clean, warm, and full of little touches that showed how deeply she loved her child. Drawings taped to the fridge, a toy car collection on the window ledge, second-hand books stacked near the couch. Before he left, Keanu knelt beside the boy. You take care of your mom, all right? The boy smiled. I already do. Keanu walked out into the street, the night colder now, the stars dim behind city haze. The video went live at midnight. By morning, it had been shared over 70,000 times, and by afternoon, reporters were calling St. Francis for comment. But in the shadows, Margaret wasn't finished. She picked up the phone and made one final call. It's time to end this. Permanently. The voice they tried to erase the morning after the interview went live. Glenfield didn't wake up the same way it usually did. The bakery didn't open on time. The church doors stayed shut longer than normal, and phones buzzed relentlessly across coffee tables and office desks. Evelyn's voice, calm, shaking, honest, had rippled through a town that had always prided itself on polite silence. And for the first time in years, People were listening to the one person they were once told to ignore. Keanu Reeves sat in the back corner of a small cafe just 2 blocks from City Hall, his hoodie pulled low, headphones in but not playing anything. His phone lay on the table, screen dimmed, but the notifications were endless. Messages from friends, strangers, news outlets, lawyers. People were reaching out not because he was famous, but because he had stood beside someone no one else would. Across the table sat Jonathan, scrolling through the flood of comments on the interview. "You won't believe this," he muttered. "There's a woman from another town who says she was in the same shelter at St. Francis. Same story. They tried to take her baby too." Keanu leaned in. "Did she give her name?" "Not yet," Jonathan replied. "But that's not all. A retired nurse from the shelter also messaged. She said she remembers Evelyn, said there were irregularities in paperwork. She's willing to talk." Keanu nodded slowly. "They're all coming out now, because someone finally broke the silence." Jonathan's eyes darkened. But not everyone's happy about that. He slid his phone across the table, displaying a message forwarded from his anonymous contact at the courthouse. Church attorney submitted request to review Evelyn's custody status. Suspect an attempt to open an old case file. Could be dangerous. Be careful. Keanu read it twice, his jaw tightening. "They're trying to take her son again. Or scare her into silence," Jonathan said. "Either way, they're moving fast." Keanu stood suddenly. "We need to warn her." Meanwhile, Evelyn sat on the worn-out sofa in her apartment, the TV muted, her son drawing dinosaurs with colored pencils on the carpet. The boy's laughter brought her moments of peace, but inside her chest a storm was brewing. The video had brought attention, yes, support, absolutely. But with it came fear. She had lived too long in the shadows to fully trust the light. Knock on the door startled her. She opened it cautiously and found a man in a suit standing in the hallway. He held a clipboard in one hand and a business card in the other. "Ms. Evelyn Carter?" he asked. "Yes?" she replied hesitantly. "You've been served," he said, handing her the envelope. "Emergency petition filed by a private religious organization to challenge your custody on moral grounds. Hearing requested for 48 hours from now." She stared at the paper, lips trembling. This can't be real." "You'll need to appear in court," the man said, "and you'll need legal counsel. Good luck." He turned and left without another word. Evelyn closed the door with shaking hands. Her knees buckled, and she slid down to the floor. Her son looked up from the carpet, concerned. "Mommy?" She forced a smile, hiding the panic behind her eyes. "Everything's okay, sweetheart. Just a little grown-up stuff." But inside she felt like the walls were closing in again. Just when she thought she had found her voice, they were trying to take away the one thing that mattered most, her child. An hour later, Keanu and Jonathan arrived. When Evelyn showed them the document, Jonathan cursed under his breath and immediately called a lawyer he trusted in the city. Keanu remained calm, but there was a fire in his eyes Evelyn hadn't seen before. "They think they can intimidate you," Keanu said. "They think you're still that scared 19-year-old girl, but you're not. And this time you're not alone." Evelyn shook her head, overwhelmed. "But I don't have money for a lawyer. And if they win, they won't," Jonathan cut in. "We've got legal aid on our side now. I've already got a law firm reviewing everything, and the public is watching. They can't hide behind closed doors anymore." But Margaret was already 2 steps ahead. Behind the scenes, she had enlisted a powerful legal team tied to one of the wealthiest donors of the church. They planned to argue that Evelyn had endangered her child by exposing him to public scrutiny through the interview. They would twist her courage into recklessness, her truth into instability. They didn't need to prove she was a bad mother. They only needed to cast enough doubt to make the court nervous. And they had one more card to play. On the morning of the hearing, as Evelyn walked up the steps of the courthouse flanked by Keanu and Jonathan, a photographer appeared seemingly out of nowhere. The next day, a headline ran in a conservative paper: "Single Mother Courts Controversy Uses Celebrity to Push Anti-Church Agenda." But the response wasn't what Margaret expected. Comments flooded in under the article, not with hate, but with love. That single mother raised a boy while fighting a system built to erase her. Maybe if churches stopped shaming, they wouldn't lose so many hearts. Keanu Reeves is doing what Jesus would. Inside the courtroom, Evelyn sat with her head held high. Her lawyer, a sharp woman named Claire Delaney, argued fiercely. She presented not only Evelyn's clean record and her son's well-being, but the testimonies of 3 other women who had since come forward with stories nearly identical to hers. One by one, they gave statements by video, detailing how the shelter had pressured them, isolated them, forged papers, and threatened their futures. But the turning point came when Evelyn was asked to speak. She stood slowly, her hands trembling but her voice strong. "I am not perfect," she said, "but I have fought every day to give my son a life filled with love, safety, and truth. I never asked for pity. I never asked for fame. I just wanted to be seen as human. They tried to take that from me once. I won't let them do it again." Her words settled in the room like a quiet flame. And then, without being called, Keanu stood up in the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor," he said, "I know I'm not a lawyer, but I've known Evelyn only a short time, and she's already reminded me what courage really looks like. If you take this boy away from her, you're not protecting him. You're punishing him for his mother's strength." The judge didn't scold him, didn't ask him to sit. Instead, he looked down at Evelyn and said quietly, "We'll take a short recess." 2 hours later, the court returned with its decision. The petition was denied. Custody remained with Evelyn. As the news spread, the crowd outside the courthouse erupted in cheers. Journalists rushed forward. Strangers embraced. Supporters held signs that read, "Truth doesn't need approval and her voice matters." But in a dark office across town, Margaret watched it all unfold on her screen. She didn't cry, didn't yell. She simply whispered, "You think this is over. It's not." Because what no one knew, not even Keanu, was that Margaret held one more secret. A secret buried deep in the records of St. Francis. A secret that tied Evelyn, not just to the church, but to Keanu himself. The name in the ledger 3 days passed since the courtroom doors closed behind Evelyn and Keanu, but the echo of what happened inside continued to ripple far beyond the walls. The headlines didn't stop. The interview had now surpassed 3 million views. Women from cities and small towns alike began to share their own stories of being silenced, overlooked, or erased. Stories that echoed Evelyn's pain in haunting detail. News crews came to Glenfield. People stopped Evelyn on the street, thanking her for being brave. Strangers offered to pay her rent, send groceries, babysit her son. The tide had shifted. Where there had once been shame and silence, now there was solidarity. But in the midst of the storm of support, something darker stirred beneath the surface. Keanu Reeves stood alone in the back room of the Hillcrest Library, surrounded by stacks of aging church records. The air smelled of ink, dust, and secrets. Jonathan had helped him get access to the archives of St. Francis through a contact, a former volunteer who remembered hearing Evelyn's name before. They had told Keanu there were ledgers, private, donations, handwritten files that had never been digitized, and for some reason he couldn't explain, he needed to see them. Not just for Evelyn, for himself. As his fingers flipped through the yellowed pages of donation logs, one column stopped him cold. April 3rd, 2000, anonymous donation for Protective Relocation Fund, amount $25,000 notes, to assist a young girl during ABI. Private transfer, no media contact. Keanu narrowed his eyes. Something about the date felt familiar. He checked his phone, pulling up the timeline Evelyn had shared. Her son had been born in March 2000. She'd fled the shelter weeks later. His hand trembled as he turned to the next page. At the bottom of the sheet, barely legible under faded ink, was a small handwritten line. Arranged by Margaret Devane. Approved by for Callahan. Connected contact. KeanuReeves. Keanu froze. His chest tightened. He read the line again and again. He hadn't spoken to a Far Callahan in over 2 decades. Back then, when his fame had just begun to rise, He had been contacted discreetly about helping fund a few private cases involving young women in trouble. They told him it was for victims of abuse that the girls were being relocated to escape danger. He remembered writing a check, anonymously. No details, no follow-up. He never knew one of those girls was Evelyn. The room spun for a moment. He sat down slowly, running his fingers through his hair. The weight of that page, the realization that he had been a part of Evelyn's story long before he ever met her, was almost too much to hold. But this wasn't coincidence. This was the thread Margaret had been waiting to pull. That night, a letter arrived at Evelyn's apartment. This time it wasn't from a court. It was from Margaret. No envelope, no signature, just typed words printed on fine paper. You should ask your friend Keanu why your name appeared in his donation files at St. Francis. He knew about you long before the wedding. Did he ever tell you that? Evelyn read it twice, then sat on the edge of her bed, heart pounding. Doubt crept in like fog, cold and uninvited. The timing of Keanu's arrival, his sudden interest, the protection, the cameras. Was it all just guilt? When Keanu knocked on her door the next morning, she opened it with eyes that held more questions than trust. He saw it immediately. You got the letter, he said quietly. She nodded. Is it true? Keanu took a deep breath. I didn't know it was you. Not then. I was contacted through an intermediary. They told me a girl needed help. No names, no details. Just that she was in danger and couldn't stay. They said the money would go to her relocation and safety. I didn't question it. I just wanted to help. Evelyn crossed her arms, her voice trembling. And now you're here, in my life, after all these years, and I'm supposed to believe it's a coincidence? Keanu stepped closer. I didn't know, Evelyn. Not until 3 days ago. Not until I saw the ledger. Her eyes filled with tears, not from betrayal, but from the cruel twist of fate. So you helped me, and didn't even know you were saving me. I didn't save you, he said, his voice soft but unwavering. You did that. I just passed a check across a desk. You're the one who ran, who fought, who stood. Everything I did was quiet. Everything you did was loud. And you did it alone. She looked at him, anger melting slowly into something else, something harder to name. Why are you really here, Keanu? Why did you stay after the wedding? He didn't answer at first, then almost in a whisper he said, Because you reminded me of my sister. Evelyn blinked. Keanu looked down. Her name was Kim. She passed years ago. She was strong, stubborn. She fought cancer for over a decade. I watched her keep her dignity when the world tried to steal it. And when I saw you, standing alone, in that church, holding your son's hand like it was the only thing keeping you standing, I saw her, and I knew if she were still alive, she'd have told me to sit down beside you. Evelyn said nothing. She just reached for his hand, and for a long while they sat in silence. But Margaret wasn't finished. Later that night, she arranged a press conference in front of the very church that had turned Evelyn away. She stood with her lawyer, her hands clasped, and her voice filled with righteous fire. We must protect our sacred institutions, she declared. Today, our faith is under attack by those who twist stories, spread lies, and seek sympathy through spectacle. We respect single mothers. We support them, but we do not reward rebellion and disrespect for the church. Then she held up a photograph, a blurred still from the shelter's archives. This is a young girl who took advantage of our mercy, and now she wants to rewrite history with the help of a Hollywood actor looking for his next cause. The message was clear. They were coming not just for Evelyn's truth, but for her very identity. But what Margaret didn't count on was who would step forward next. As her speech aired live, another video began circulating, uploaded quietly to social media by a woman named Dolores Estrada, a retired administrator from St. Francis. Her voice shook as she stared into the camera. My name is Dolores. I worked at the shelter for 24 years, and what happened to Evelyn was not only true, it was repeated. Many times. Girls were shamed, threatened, and pressured into silence. And now, I can't stay silent anymore. She included photocopies of internal memos, handwritten notes. One in particular stood out. Subject, Evelyn Carter, mark as non-compliant. Pursued disciplinary relocation, if no consent signed by April 9th. The date matched the one in the ledger. Within hours, the video went viral. Margaret's press conference unraveled before it ended. Evelyn sat on her sofa with her son asleep, beside her. She watched the screen, watched the woman she never met speak the truth that had once nearly broken her. Keanu watched too, sitting at the edge of the room, shoulders tense. When the video ended, Evelyn whispered, "I'm not alone anymore." "No," Keanu said, "you never were." But as they sat in the quiet glow of the TV screen, a new message appeared on Evelyn's phone. "You think the church is your only enemy? Think again. The person who forged your papers isn't Margaret. It's someone even closer." And the real betrayal was just beginning. The betrayal that wore a smile. The morning after Dolores Estrada's video exposed the hidden truth of St. Francis Shelter, Evelyn woke to a silence unlike anything she had felt in years. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness that comes right before everything you thought you knew falls apart. Her phone sat on the table like it was waiting to sting her again. The last message still glowed on the screen, unanswered. "You think the church is your only enemy? Think again. The person who forged your papers isn't Margaret, it's someone even closer." She had stared at those words for hours, reading them again and again, trying to understand what they meant. Who could be closer than Margaret? Closer than the very church that rejected her? Who had the power to sign away her rights when she was only 19, scared and abandoned? Who would know just where to twist the knife? She picked up the phone and called Jonathan first. He promised to trace the message, said it came from a hidden source, one using a secure route he'd seen before in whistleblower cases. He told her to stay calm, but his voice was too quiet. He already suspected something. Keanu arrived not long after. He didn't knock. She had left the door unlocked. He stepped inside and saw her sitting on the couch, still in her robe, eyes red from a night without sleep. She handed him the phone without a word. After reading the message, he lowered it slowly and met her gaze. "Who do you think it is?" She swallowed hard. "I don't know. I've tried to think. But the only people who even had access to my life back then were Margaret, a few church elders, and my mother." The room froze around them. Keanu sat down slowly. "Your mother?" Evelyn nodded, but her face twisted with pain even saying the word. "She visited me once at the shelter. I was just a week into recovery. After giving birth, she brought clothes, smiled like everything was fine, said she wanted to talk about making things right. I thought she came to take me home. But that same night, the administrator told me papers had been signed. Someone had relieved me of parental custody due to spiritual concerns, and I never saw my mother again after that." Keanu's jaw clenched. "You think she signed them?" "I don't know what to think," Evelyn whispered. "But if it's true," her voice cracked. She didn't finish the sentence. Some betrayals were too sharp to name. Jonathan arrived, 20 minutes later, laptop in hand, face pale. He didn't sit. He opened the screen and turned it toward them. "I traced the message," he said. "It came from someone named Daniel Robbins. He was a clerk at St. Francis at the time of your stay. He's been in hiding for years. Witness protection, actually. But yesterday, when your story went viral, he broke protocol and reached out to me." "Why?" Keanu asked. Jonathan tapped the screen. A recorded video opened. It was grainy, filmed, in what looked like a cabin or basement with poor lighting. Daniel appeared, older now, eyes sunken but alert. "My name is Daniel Robbins. I worked at St. Francis from 1998 to 2002. I handled records, legal forms, and admissions. I saw everything. What they did to Evelyn wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated operation, and the directive to forge her parental release came from her mother, not Margaret, not the deacon. Her mother, Nora Carter, Jonathan stopped the video. Silence flooded the room. Evelyn couldn't breathe. It felt like her heart had fallen into a void. Her mother, the woman who had held her hand when she was 5, braided her hair when she was 9, and then turned away when she needed her most, hadn't just abandoned her. She had signed her away. "I need to see her," Evelyn said, her voice hollow. Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Are you sure?" "No," she whispered. "But I have to." That afternoon, they drove to the outskirts of town. Her mother still lived in the same house, a modest one-story with a rusting mailbox and a white porch swing that hadn't moved in years. Everything looked exactly as Evelyn remembered, except it felt smaller now, weaker, like the lies holding it up were beginning to collapse. Keanu stayed in the car. She walked alone. Her mother answered the door after 2 knocks, surprised to see her. She was older now, hair gray, her shoulders bent, but her eyes were still sharp. "Evelyn," she said softly. "I didn't expect you." "I know," Evelyn replied. "You never do." They stood there for a moment. Then her mother stepped back. "Come in." The living room hadn't changed. Same doilies on the armrests. Same photographs of Evelyn's cousins and siblings on the wall, but none of her. It was like she had been erased not just from the house but from memory. They sat across from each other in stiff chairs. Evelyn spoke first. "Did you sign the papers at St. Francis?" Her mother's expression didn't change. She looked down, then up again, and said, "Yes." Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. "Why?" she asked. "How could you?" Nora Carter's voice didn't shake. "Because I was afraid. Because the church told me you were on a path to destroy yourself and that you needed correction. They said if I didn't help, they would excommunicate our family, ruin our reputation. Your brother was just starting school. Your father had heart issues. I was desperate. So you gave them your daughter?" Evelyn snapped, tears in her voice. "You gave them me?" "I thought they'd help you," her mother said weakly. "I thought it would be temporary." "Then why did you never come back?" Evelyn stood shaking. "Why did you never call? Never write? I needed you. I was dying inside. And you were living a clean life like I never existed." Her mother looked away. "Because it was easier to believe you hated me. Because I didn't know how to fix it." Evelyn didn't respond. She stared at the woman who had brought her into the world and broken her more deeply than any stranger ever could. Then she said, "You don't get to fix it, but you will confess it." She left the house without another word. The next morning, Nora Carter appeared beside Evelyn during a live community forum, hosted by Jonathan's channel. She held a paper in her hands, a notarized confession. She read it in front of hundreds watching live and thousands more online. "I, Nora Carter, knowingly signed a forged parental release at the instruction of St. Francis staff in the year 2000, under pressure from church officials and fear of family consequences. I understand my actions caused harm to my daughter and her child, and I accept full responsibility." Evelyn stood beside her, not as a daughter asking for love, but as a woman claiming her power. Later backstage, Keanu held her hand as the crowd dispersed. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," she whispered. "I survived it. Now we heal it." But before the day ended, Jonathan received one final message from Daniel Robbins. "The church has called in external auditors to scrub their archives. They're destroying records. If we're going to act, it has to be now." And what came next would be the most important fight of all. The house built on silence. It began with a single email. A warning. A quiet whisper from the man who had once been part of the machine. Daniel Robbins, the former records clerk, had confirmed what many feared but couldn't prove. St. Francis was destroying its past. Records were being scrubbed, files shredded, computers wiped clean. The very evidence that proved Evelyn's story, and the stories of countless others, was being erased in real time. It was not just an act of self-preservation. It was a final attempt to bury the truth before the world saw it. Evelyn sat in, Jonathan's office with her son beside her watching cartoons on a small tablet. She didn't speak. She just stared at the wall. The events of the past few days had stripped her down to the rawest version of herself. She had faced the church, the courts, her mother. She had stood beneath the weight of shame and turned it into something stronger, and now, when the finish line seemed so close, it was slipping through her fingers like sand. Keanu stood across the room, arms folded, his gaze fixed on Jonathan's laptop. "If they're wiping the records," he said, "we have no proof left. The testimonies, the videos, the confessions, they matter, but they can call all of it hearsay without the paperwork." Jonathan nodded, scrolling through encrypted messages from Daniel. "There's one chance. He says there's a backup, a hidden server that was never fully connected to the main system. It's in the basement archive vault beneath the old chapel. He had access back then but was too afraid to copy it. Now he's willing, but he needs help." "He's going in?" Evelyn asked, her voice hoarse. "Not alone," Keanu said firmly. "We'll go with him." That night, while the town slept under a moonless sky, Keanu and Jonathan pulled up to the side entrance of the abandoned wing of the St. Francis complex. Daniel waited for them in the shadows, a thin man with sharp eyes and the nervous hands of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. He held a flashlight, a small tool bag, and a key that had somehow never been deactivated. They entered through a rusted steel door and descended a narrow staircase, dust swirling around them like ghosts of forgotten lives. At the bottom, they found the archive vault, an old records room lined with filing cabinets, a row of ancient computers, and in the far corner, a locked terminal labeled, simply, Level B, Staff Restricted. "It's all here," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "Buried. Every intake form, every donation log, every forged document. I just need time." Jonathan kept watch at the door while Keanu helped Daniel power up the machine. The screen flickered to life, slow, sluggish, but not dead. The system whirred with age as folders appeared one by one. Evelyn's name came up almost immediately. Under it, Case ID 45, Site 0. Linked to it were 7 other names, other girls who had passed through during that same year. Daniel inserted a flash drive and began the transfer. "This is enough to take them down," he whispered. "But once we move this, they'll know." Keanu looked at him. "Let them." They got out just before midnight. By morning, the data was uploaded securely to 3 independent legal advocacy groups, including one partnered with National Human Rights Councils. The documents were authenticated, matched with testimony, and prepared for release. Jonathan crafted the headline, "The Silence Beneath the Cross: How St. Francis Hid Decades of Abuse in Plain Sight." It dropped at noon on every major platform, not just his channel, but through national syndicates thanks to a quiet deal made behind the scenes with several journalists who had been waiting for a story they could no longer ignore. The article exploded. Within hours, it trended globally. Stand with Evelyn appeared on banners, t-shirts, murals. Women in churches across the country began organizing walkouts. Protests formed at church headquarters. Survivors came forward by the dozens. But the story wasn't just about pain. It was about courage. At the heart of it stood a single mother who had once been thrown out of a church during a wedding, holding her son's hand with nothing but dignity and silence. Now she stood before millions, her voice clear, steady, unshakable. In a televised interview with Keanu beside her, Evelyn said, "I never wanted revenge. I just wanted truth. I wanted the lies to stop. And I wanted my son to know that standing up for yourself doesn't make you broken. It makes you free." The backlash from St. Francis leadership was swift. Statements were issued, apologies crafted with legal precision. Margaret was quietly removed from her post. Others were suspended. Investigations began. But none of it could undo what had already been revealed. The house built on silence had begun to crumble. Keanu, for his part, stayed out of the spotlight as the media focused on Evelyn's strength. He declined interviews, turned down appearances. Instead, he visited the same park where she once sat, watching her son chase pigeons in the sunlight. He sat on the same bench and whispered a thank you into the wind, for being allowed to witness someone else's rise, for being reminded of what mattered. On the 6-month anniversary of the court ruling, a community event was held in Glenfield's main square. Not a protest, not a media circus, a celebration. Families came, survivors came, candles were lit. Music played. Evelyn stood on the small stage, her son beside her. She spoke not of suffering, but of healing. We are not defined by who turned their backs on us, she said. We are defined by who we became in their absence. And to the next young girl who is told she is too loud, too broken, too different, I hope you know there's power in your voice, and the right people will hear you. As the crowd applauded, Keanu stood in the back, away from the cameras. Evelyn found him later beneath the string lights, hands in his pockets, eyes watching the sky. You're leaving soon, she said. He nodded. Back to filming, but I'll visit and call. I'm not vanishing. She smiled. You never did. He looked at her, pride in his eyes. You did something no one could have written in a script. You changed everything. Then her son ran up and wrapped his arms around Keanu's waist. Uncle Keanu, he said, can I still come see your movies? Keanu laughed. Only if you promise to bring popcorn. As the music played and lanterns lit the sky, Evelyn held her son close and looked out at the faces smiling back at her. Faces that once looked away. Now they listened. Now they stood. Not because she asked, but because she spoke. And because someone, quiet, kind, unshakably good, had stepped forward when the world tried to push her out. A cross hung around her son's neck that night. Not for religion, but as a symbol of strength. Carved from the same wood as the pain his mother once carried, they had tried to throw her out of the church. But instead, she became the reason others found their way back in.